Did you just put the ring on, or are you in the first few years of your marriage? Welcome to the First Year Marriage Show, a podcast dedicated to helping newlyweds navigate the first few years of marriage. My husband, Marcus, and I will be sharing marriage tips to help you build a strong foundation for your marriage. We believe having a strong foundation is essential to having a happy, healthy, and lasting marriage. We will also be learning from the experiences of awesome married couples who have been where you are today, taking from them lessons to help you build a strong foundation for the lasting marriage you desire. Take a deep breath, relax, learn, and enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the First Year Marriage Show. I'm your host, Marcus Kusi, and before I play today's episode, we wanted to thank you guys for leaving us reviews and ratings on iTunes. Your reviews and ratings have helped this podcast to rank high on iTunes, and as a result, other couples have been able to discover this podcast, especially newlyweds who need something like this to motivate them whilst they are going through the difficulties, the hard moments, and the adjustments during their first few years of marriage. We'll be glad if you've not left us a ratings or review to leave us one whenever you can. To do that, you just have to visit firstyearmarriage.com/iTunes or firstyearmarriage.com/Stitcher. We would like to thank Makelo J, Mr. Clever, Dudeman135, Nick at 5 Minutes with Dad, Kimanzi Constable, Leah43, and Steve Tessler for leaving us your reviews and ratings on iTunes for this past week. Thank you all once again, and now let's get on to today's episode. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the First Year Marriage Show. I am your host, Marcus Kusi, and in today's episode, I'll be sharing the first year marriage story of Steve and Beth Tessler. Steve is a mail handler, and Beth is a surgical coordinator. They have both been married for over 19 years, have 2 kids and 2 stepchildren from Steve's first marriage. They both live in Cincinnati, Ohio. So Steve and Beth, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you met each other?
Well, Steve and I met in the military. We were both on active duty, and we were stationed in Orlando, Florida. And Steve had been my instructor at damage control and firefighting school. And then we didn't see each other after that until I ran into him after boot camp, and we were both stationed at the base. And he was actually dating my roommate's friend.
Yep, that's how we met. It was almost like fate, because earlier when she was in boot camp at firefighting school, I had spoken to her before, and I'd seen her, and she seemed really interesting. And because usually when the recruits were waiting to fight fires, the instructors would talk to the recruits and give them advice and kind of mentor them. And I had remembered one of my instructor friends talking to Beth, and she was supposed to have gone to Tennessee to become a storekeeper and go to a ship. And
but fate kind of intervened.
Yeah, it definitely intervened.
We were best friends. He was dating another girl. We were best friends for about 9 months.
Oh,
and,
okay.
We got, we were very comfortable around each other before we even went on our first date.
Oh, okay. That's pretty awesome then.
Yeah, it was. It was really neat. If I had to do it over again, I would definitely say be best friends with somebody, because they know the good and the bad before you even get into a relationship. So
yeah, that's really good. Unfortunately for me, I and my wife, we weren't best friends before we met. We just met one day, and then we started everything, talking and sharing ideas, and then we kicked off from there.
It can work both ways, but I know for me, just because I was older, I was 28 when we met. I had already had preset ideas about the way things are supposed to go with marriage, and first year was definitely not the normal year.
How would you guys describe your first year?
Adventurous.
Challenging
and adventurous. So with the challenges that you guys had, was it in relation to the adjustments you had in the first year, or was it in relation to how the new lifestyle of being married and the lifestyle of being together as a military couple?
That was a big part of it, because we are, like I said, we had been best friends, so we already knew how we worked, how we handled situations. But I stayed in Orlando, and Steve was transferred to Jacksonville, Florida. And so for that first year, I commuted back and forth. I'd spend 4 days in Orlando and then 3 days in Jacksonville. So we didn't get to have as much newlywed bonding as most people would. And then, of course, the demands of military service, where you have long duty days where you're away from your spouse no matter what for 24 hours, even if you're in town. And then I was also got pregnant within the first 2 months of our marriage.
Wow. That's not easy.
No, it wasn't, but it was an adventure. We rolled with the punches and adjusted, and each day brought a new challenge along. I think one of the things that we did best was communicate.
With communication, how did you guys communicate? Did you try to learn from other married couples, or did you get any special advice from someone else?
I think since we were an older couple and my first marriage, we didn't communicate well at all. So when we were best friends and we were always talking, communication always came up as one of the number one things to do as a couple. And so that really helped us out a lot. And I always called her, obviously, every night and sometimes during the day. And then when she came up to Jacksonville, we always tried to spend as much quality time as possible.
That is pretty awesome. With our listeners that are listening, that are just got married or are about to get married, what would be the one tip or one advice that you give to them concerning communication with each other?
It might sound really weird, but we even with the technology age, and we had cell phones and that stuff then. But if there's separation, we do FaceTime or talk over the phone. But we always made sure every night before we went to sleep, no matter how busy we had been that day, Steve was the last person I talked to at night and the first person I talked to every morning, because he was my priority. I mean, the military has its own demands, but I wanted to make sure that he knew if we were separate apart, that he knew how much I loved him and that I had a good day and I was home, I was safe, I was getting ready to go to sleep. And the same thing in the morning, that I was awake, I was ready to start my day, and that, remind him again how much I loved him first thing in the morning.
Steve, is there anything that you want to add to it?
That's how it happened and how it worked. Oh. And we've made it work.
So I know with military lifestyle, there are a lot of adjustments that you're going to go through. Whilst you guys were going through all of these hardship moments, is there any particular time or point in time that you guys will hit a wall?
One of the most difficult things early on was when we were trying to get stationed together. And the way the military works is we could be co-located. So we called our detailers. Those are the people that give out our jobs. And our detailers said, "Oh, you can be co-located. We'll put Beth in Norfolk, Virginia, and you can stay in Jacksonville."
Wow.
And we were like, "That's over 500 miles away." And they're like, "Well, that's the distance to be co-located. And that's right outside the maximum, but you'd still be co-located." And we're like, how can we be together with that? And that didn't work for us. So we took it a step further, and
I called in a big favor from my parents, who my dad was in politics just locally in Cincinnati here, but he had made some friends, and so he called Senator John Glenn and said, "Listen, I have a daughter, a son-in-law. They have a 1-month-old child, and the military is trying to move them from Virginia and Jacksonville and say that they can live that way." And my dad said, "This is a little over there. They're just getting ready to be married a year, and this doesn't work." He goes, "Oh, I'll look into it. I'll see what I can do." And in less than 24 hours, we had orders where we're going to be our next duty station, which was in Japan.
Wow. From Florida to Virginia all the way to Japan.
Correct.
That must not have been easy. Were you guys surprised with that move?
We were surprised by the fact that our detailers called us, because detailers never call an individual usually. But they called us and they were like, "Where do you guys want to be? Where do you guys want to go?" And we're like, we're still deciding our orders, and they're like, we'll put you in Japan, and we're going to put you both on sea duty. And so I was like, how can we both be on a ship and still have our son there with us? And they said, well, Beth's command is a shore command, but it's considered sea duty in Japan. So she was on shore duty, and I was on the ship. So that's the way we had wanted it in the first place, because I liked being on a ship somewhat, because there was more action for me and my job, because I was a firefighter in the Navy, and Beth was a journalist, so she was on shore duty while I was at sea.
I'm really happy everything worked out for you guys. You both wanted to be somewhere that you'd be together, even though it was outside of the U.S. You were still happy with the choices that the tailors made for you guys.
We were very happy. The biggest thing that we said, we would go anywhere they wanted us to go as long as we were together. We didn't like to commute, and we didn't like not being able to see each other first thing in the morning and the last thing at night.
Yeah, that's really true. I definitely resonate with that. As a newlywed, you want to be with your husband or your wife every time, or whenever you have the moment to be with them. You don't want to be separated apart at all.
That's very true.
Yeah. So share with us some of the funny times or exciting moments you had during your first year. I know with the first year of marriage, there are definitely going to be some fun times. For me, I always refer to the toilet seat case or the toilet seat scenario whereby one lifts it up and the other lifts it down. Could you share with us any experience that you had that was really funny during your first year?
I had been promoted during our first year. I was an E6, and I was promoted to Chief Petty Officer, which is an E7, and I had to go through a huge initiation that's top secret in the Navy, or used to be at least. I'm sure anybody can look it up and see what they have to go through. But Beth being a lower pay grade than me, she was an E4. I was worried about how the other chief petty officers would take that, and they really did. The chief petty officers really didn't have to deal with it. It was the other wives, because the wives got together and then the chiefs got together. But during this whole initiation, we were run through a gamut of different things. But they would always come back to her, and they would tell her that she's my captain and stuff like that. So it was stuff like that. I mean, that was one of the most funniest things.
Did you guys have any happy moments, like moments that you guys were both excited about? I'm trying to imagine the kind of excitement that you both had when you got that phone call from the detailer. Was that like a really exciting moment for you guys?
It was exciting because, one, they said we could be together, so we're like, oh, that's awesome. And then they're like, well, you have to be in Japan. And then it was like, wow, even all my time in the Navy, I would only go and visit all different kinds of ports, but I'd never lived overseas. So that was the start of a great adventure, and I believe Beth felt the same way.
I did, yeah. I do have to tell a really funny kind of story, though. We were stationed in Japan, and we'd only been there about a month. We were living in a house outside of base, and our son, Savino, was very small, and we heard this. Steve was on the ship because he had to stay overnight, and we heard a scurrying, and I thought, okay, well, maybe, the tatami mats are underneath the mats that were the floor. There was dirt. It wasn't like American homes. And I thought, well, maybe there's something under there. And I heard it again and saw a really very, very large spider. And I tried every trick I had to kill this spider that was probably about as big as my hand. And wow. It charged me. It was a very aggressive spider. So I called Steve on the ship. I said, you have to come home right now. He goes, I can't. I'm on duty. I can't leave the ship. I said, well, Savino and I will come down there and meet you, because I'm not staying at this house with this huge spider. I'm afraid it's going to attack us when we sleep. He goes, oh, no. Well, Steve has a particular like for spiders. I don't. And so he came home and had asked some of the Japanese workers that worked with him the best way to kill this spider. And they said, well, it's very, usually if it's a big one, it's going to be aggressive. So it's going to come at you when you try to kill it. So he had brought some Japanese, poison home with him. And he killed the spider. Me, I would have just flushed it down the toilet, but Steve had to wrap it up in saran wrap and take it back to the ship with him so he could show his coworker exactly what this huge spider looked like.
Steve, what was your reaction when she came to the ship and then told you about this?
Well, I was on the ship and I had to go home. She was still at home. But when I got home, her and my son were on the bed and she's like, the spider's over there. And my thinking was she was over exaggerating. But when I saw it, actually I heard it first because we had tatami mats. It was an original Japanese house, tatami mat. And the flooring was tatami mats. And the spider had claws on its legs, and you could hear it scurry along the mat. So I was like, that sounds pretty big. And then I saw it, and it was a good 6 inches round.
Wow.
It was huge. It was bigger than any tarantula I've seen. And it was I believe it was a wolf spider.
I think that's what they call them.
So I killed it with a broom and all that. But the reason I took it back to the ship is because I wanted our medical to see if they were poisonous. And since every spider's poisonous, but in case one got to our son or something like that, to see if they were poisonous. And they are, but they're not poisonous to humans. They're just very large and very aggressive.
So he showed it to one of the Japanese workers, dock workers, and they're like, "Oh, you got one. Where's the other one?" And apparently, wolf spiders mate for life. So if there was one in our house, there was a second one. So he came after he got off work that next day, and I got home that next day. He said, "Okay, I have to tell you the bad news first. There's another spider in the house." "How did you see this?" "I didn't see it. I didn't hear it. I didn't sleep much last night, but I didn't hear it." He goes, No. He goes, "It's the spider we killed's mate." So we had to hunt him down in our house.
And were you guys able to find him?
We finally found it, yes. And we had to kill that one too, obviously. But they were just common in Japan because they got the bugs that lived under the tatami mats. So they weren't dangerous to humans. They were just very aggressive. And I mean, Americans weren't used to that kind of spider.
They're really big.
Yeah.
I did not want something that big living in my house.
So you guys got married in Florida. You moved to Japan. You had that transition from moving with your son from US to Asia. How did you guys transition so easily or adjust to living in Japan?
Well, it was about 6 months of culture shock because their culture is very different than American culture. But the military does help you with that. They give you some classes on how to adjust and the proper things to do and the things you do not do in a foreign culture. And like Steve said, he'd been promoted. So the chief's community there, the spouses, if the ship was gone, they were a support group. And if you had questions, if you had concerns, if you got sick and somebody needed help take care of the baby, they were there to help. And so we, the 3.5 years that we were there, built a very strong support group of friends. So that if I needed something in the middle of the night and Steve was gone and the baby was sleeping or something, I knew there were people that I could call. Rather, couldn't contact Steve on the ship. But again, it came down to working together as a team so that he knew all the people that I had as a support staff. And if there was something I needed and I didn't know where to go to get it, Steve was able to talk to the chiefs that he worked with on the ship and say, "Hey, this is what's going on. My wife needs this. What can I do?" And so other than ourselves, they always say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, in this fact, it takes a military community to help raise a child. So that, again, went right back to the communication where if I communicated to Steve that I was having difficulty with something or couldn't accomplish something that we needed to accomplish back in Sasebo, Japan, and he was in the middle of the Asian Sea, then he was able to get me that information as well.
That's pretty awesome. I'm really glad you were able to get a support community to help you because when I moved to from Ghana to the US, I also went through that cultural shock and without having someone here who was willing to teach me and show me how things were done over here, I would have struggled a lot during that first year that I was in the US.
It, it's very true.
Yeah. So I know you guys have been married for over 19 years, and you definitely might have, or I wouldn't say should, but you definitely would have encountered some marriage programs that you think, or some marriage books that you think have really impacted your marriage. What are some of those books or resources that you think have really helped you guys with your marriage?
Well, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I do read books, but the podcasts that I listen to, the one marriage podcast in particular is a Stupendous Marriage Show with Stu Gray and Lisa Gray, and it's an outstanding podcast for marriages and stuff like that.
I listen to their podcast every week, and I really enjoy the start that they show on their podcast. It's very, very encouraging. And listeners out there, if you want to check out the Stupendous Marriage podcast, you just have to search in iTunes Stupendous Marriage, and it should pop up right there. For you, Beth, was there anything that helped you?
I relied on personal experience more than reading a book or listening to a podcast. My parents, before my father passed away, had been married for 54 years.
Wow.
And early on, Steve and I both decided that no matter what obstacle we encountered, that divorce was not a word that was in our vocabulary. That when we spoke our vows, it was a commitment, and we had to work out the problems, no matter how big they were or how small they were. So over the 19 years, we've encountered some challenges, but as long as we were able to talk about them and we were able to find a resource or someone else who had some kind of an experience that could help us weed through it or do what was necessary, we've been able to overcome just about anything.
Another resource that's really helped us is church. We found a really good church that we go to every Sunday and on different other occasions. That just really helps us out a lot too.
Oh, okay.
I go to church a lot.
I'm really glad you found really inspiring people to help you guys when you were newlyweds, and as you grew in your marriage journey, you still were able to find a church that could support you during the hard times and really impact you to make a difference with your marriage. So, Steve and Beth, I know you've been married over 19 years, and I know with marriage, what I've observed or what I've read online is usually most couples who make it past 20 years realize, once the kids are out of the house, they've grown apart and they don't have similar interests or things that they can do together. With you guys, what are some of the things that you do to grow together so that you do not grow apart as you you progress in your marriage?
One of the things that when we were living in Italy, Beth took up cake decorating because they didn't have American style cakes in Italy. So that was about at my 17-year mark in the Navy, and I started getting interested in that too. So me and Beth together started decorating cakes. And once we came back to the States, we started a little business selling cakes. And then I took a bunch of classes and actually worked at a cake store after I retired, and then moved on to the post office. But I also taught cake classes. And even when I was teaching cake classes, Beth would help me with that. And she would get orders and I'd get orders. So we would help each other decorate cakes, and we like doing that. We've stopped now since I'm working so much at the post office, but we might pick that up again. But other things we like to go shopping together a lot.
We love travel. As you can tell, we've been all over the world.
Yeah, I can see you've been everywhere. So, yeah.
So we try to find a hobby that we can do together. And every chance that we get, we go out and we do something, whether it's, I guess people now call it date night, but we just took the time out during our marriage, even with small kids, to do something together, to reconnect, to make sure that we're still communicating and we still know what's going on in each other's lives. Whether it's at work or with the kids' school or with the sport, because our kids both play sports. Today's society gets very busy, and We just make sure that we take time out of the craziness of schedules and everything to do something together and to just sit down and have quiet conversation, or just, whether it's take a walk or walk around the mall or have a nice lunch together, whatever is required.
That's pretty amazing. What is the one lesson or advice that you guys know now that you wish you had known before you got married or during the first few years of your marriage?
I would say one of the number one things is to not be in debt. We're still in debt, not as much as we used to be, but we are still continuously paying to knock our debt down. But if we would have incorporated that early on in our marriage, because one of the number one problems with is money fights and problems, and we've never had that. But if we wouldn't have the debt, I believe it'd be, not that our marriage is rough, it would run smoother.
Okay. What about you, Beth?
I think that the finances could be a challenge. And from the get-go, when Steve and I met, I took care of the finances. And with a couple of well-directed classes that we took together to get debt-free, that it opened our eyes up to how much difficulty a couple, especially a newly married couple, can run into when each party is bringing debt into the marriage. When we had met, because I was single and I went from a pretty good paying job and then took a leave of absence and joined the military, I did not have as much debt as Steve did. But having gone through a divorce and he still had debt from his first marriage, that was a little bit challenging, because in one part of my mind I was thinking, this isn't my debt, but because we're a unit and we're a couple and we share everything, it's become my debt. So for anyone out there who's getting into a marriage, that's very important, is to reveal all of that financially to the person that you're getting married to. It definitely helps things run smoother when both parties understand exactly how much money has to go out of the house each month, how much is for fun, how much is in savings. Wide open communication as far as money goes.
I really love listening to these lessons and advice that our guests usually provide to our listeners, because these are things that happen in marriage, and having someone tell you these lessons or give you these kind of advices helps you to be able to build a really good foundation for a marriage, and makes the entrance into your married life a whole lot easier than what it would have been if you hadn't known these kind of lessons. Because this is coming from a couple who've been married for over 19 years and the kind of experience they've had over 19 years. So them pointing it out to listeners out there is something that I really appreciate. Before we end the show today, I want to ask you guys how best our listeners can contact you, or wherever they can connect with you, online, offline, how best they can reach you. Because I know someone listening out there might be interested in reaching out to you guys to say thank you for sharing your experience with me. I really learned a lot, and with what you've shared, I'll be able to apply them in my marriage and be able to build a really lasting marriage. So how best can we connect with you?
I'm on Facebook under my name, Steve Tessler. I have a blog, an active blog right now. It's www.stevetessler.net. I'm on Twitter also under my name, Steve_Tessler. And anybody can get a hold of me there. Beth is also on Facebook if people would like to get a hold of her, because she does have a vast military knowledge in how to help and who to contact and stuff like that. So I'm sure there's a lot of I would hope there's a lot of military couples out there listening.
There probably are a lot of them listening, and I know with newlyweds who are in the military or who have a spouse in the military, they are almost likely to encounter the experience that you guys had during your first year, whereby one person was living in a different state, the other was living in a different state, or living in a town whereby you have to drive maybe 4 or 5 hours just to see each other or spend some time together. So I know there are listeners out there who are in the military or married to military spouses. Thank you guys for coming on the show today. I really appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy schedule. I know, Steve, you just got out of work and you worked pretty long hours. I know you're tired because working for more than 8 hours straight is not easy, especially throughout the night. And you still took out time to share your knowledge and you share your expertise or your experience with married life to our listeners today. And I know they're all going to learn a lot and be able to apply the lessons that you shared in their marriage and be able to build a really healthy or strong foundation for their kind of marriage that they want. So thank you guys for coming on again. I really appreciate their time.
Well, thank you for having us. We really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the First Year Marriage Show. To submit a question, feedback, or suggestions for the podcast, visit firstyearmarriage.com/feedback. Apply what you've learned today and build a strong foundation for the happy, healthy, and lasting marriage you desire. Enjoy your marriage. Enjoy your life.